Welcome everyone to our webinar today. We're going to give it just about 30 seconds to a minute to let people enter the webinar. Wonderful. So welcome to everyone to today's webinar on gender identity, working with gender diverse individuals. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Ann Murphy, and I'm the director of the MHTTC, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices for individuals with mental illnesses. We encourage you to visit the MHTTC network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org, where you can then click on the spot that says Find My Center, and our center is the Northeast and Caribbean. We also encourage you to sign up at the bit.ly link on your screen to subscribe to receive our mailings and receive notifications of our activities. Next slide. Before we begin the webinar, I wanted to quickly review just some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part of a series on sexual and gender diversity. And we have the next webinar in this series coming up. The topic is the coming out process. And it had been scheduled for May 12th. We're going to be moving it to May 26th. So we'll update that on our website. And if you are already registered for that webinar, you will receive an email confirming the change in date. We also want to ask that you complete the survey that you'll receive via email following this webinar. We highly value your feedback, and we also use this input to improve our activities going forward. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys. It's a very brief survey. It'll really only take you maybe a minute to 2 minutes to complete. So we thank you in advance for that input. Next slide. We also wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website after the completion of the webinar. In addition to the link to the recording, we'll also post a link to the PowerPoint slides from today's webinar, and you will also receive an email with that link following the webinar. So everything will be sent to you after the conclusion of the webinar, probably within the next day or so. Next slide. Lastly, this webinar is interactive. On your screen, you have a taskbar with buttons that say Q&A and chat. You can use the Q&A to communicate directly with myself, my colleague Katy Rivera, who will also be helping to facilitate, and with the presenter, or you can use the chat feature. I do want to highlight that in the chat feature, you have the option of who can see your chats. So you can leave it in the default setting, which is just the panelists seeing it, so just us, or you can change it so that both the panelists and the other participants can see your chat. So if you want to share something with all of the participants, please make sure you change that feature. There are also going to be some polls in this webinar. So on your screen, you'll see a poll come up, and you can just click on the radial button for your response, and we'll be able to see your responses. So we'll let you know when that comes up. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. So now we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce you to our presenter for the day and for this series, Dr. Anthony Zazzarino. He's an assistant professor at Rutgers University in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions, where he's currently a core faculty member in the master's program in rehabilitation counseling and the doctoral program in psychiatric rehabilitation. Additionally, Dr. Zazzarino is the field experience coordinator for the counselor education and supervision track of the PhD. Previously, Dr. Zazzarino provided instruction for professional education courses for New Jersey's supported housing agencies implementing community support services. He actively presents at local, state, national, and international conferences related to sexual and gender minorities, multiculturalism, psychiatric rehabilitation methods, counseling services, housing, and supervision practices. In addition to his work at Rutgers, Dr. Zazzarino continues to conduct clinical work by facilitating group therapy for adolescents and adults at an intensive outpatient program, providing outpatient counseling at his private practice, and providing clinical supervision for counselors who need supervised clinical hours. We're very happy to have Dr. Zazzarino with us today, and I'll turn it over to him.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Murphy. And thank you all for being here today and taking just an hour out of your day to learn a little bit more and educate ourselves on this really important topic of gender diversity. I see that there's a good amount of participants on this call today. So I'm hoping to see some extra interaction, whether that's through the polls or through the chat function. Like Dr. Murphy said, feel free to pose any questions, but I do know that everybody who is on, you are muted, so you don't have to worry about muting yourselves. We have muted you. We've done that for you already. When we talk about gender, I'm going to ask everybody for the next 45 minutes or so to try to forget anything that you have ever been taught about gender. What I think I often find is that this topic is the one out of all of the topics that I talk about and present on that just gives people a headache, because gender is something that's so ingrained in our learning system and in our environment. And this really calls for a time of unlearning what we already know in order to relearn what's important to help the people that we need to help. So I'm not going to spend that much time on key terms and terminology at all. There's been an hour-long webinar that is posted on that website specifically on terms and on the importance of terminology. You will see the slides in here with the terminology defined for you, but I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on that just for the sake of time today. We will talk about the health disparities that impact the lives of gender diverse individuals. We'll explore the minority stress model and talk a little bit more about different strategies to promote effective behavioral healthcare services, though, for everyone. So let's get started. I always start a topic like this really making a really key distinction that today we are talking about gender identity. Historically, we see the acronym, or many people use the acronym of LGBTQ+. And though I think that acronym does a pretty good job of identifying and really shortening the letters for everybody, what I think it does a pretty poor job is recognizing the difference between gender identity and, I'm willing to use the word, affectional identity. For today's topic, we are talking specifically about gender and gender identity. So that means we will not talk about attraction or connection to other people. That would be more of the affectional identity. So I like this quote, even though the terminology is a little outdated, I think it still fits. It says, the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation is the difference between who you are and whom you love. So today, We are focused on who you are as a human being. So this is where I begin to ask people to ignore and kind of just forget what you've been taught, because for many of us, we've been taught gender in a very binary system of either male or female, and that's it. And when we think about other life options that we have and other situations just in our everyday life, I want you to think about the number of times that we are only allowed to have two options. So I think about hair color, I think about eye color, I think about height, I think about weight, I think about IQ. And in all of those different facets that make up who we are, we have more than two options. And yet, when it comes down to gender, we typically are only seen as either male or female. And this is where I think I need everybody to kind of just shift their mind a little bit. And I can't get into the biological aspects of it about what happens to a woman when she's pregnant and all the hormones during that pregnancy. But I do want to implore everyone to start to look at gender as this really vast continuum that includes many different types of gender and many different realms of masculinity and femininity. So you can see, and some of these terms will be defined for you in a little bit, but people ranging from gender fluid, which would be, or agender, right? And that there's a little bit mix of it all and everybody. Two really important, I think, topics just to really quickly define, and then you're all going to get to work by answering a couple polls, is just the difference between gender identity and gender expression. So when we talk about gender identity, we're specifically talking about that internal individual sense of gender. So how I identify myself and my gender. That is specifically and uniquely to that person. Now, gender identity might be one thing, but gender expression might be a totally different construct and is a totally different construct. So I might present my way in a very different manner that's interpreted to those around them. And this is where we start to get some difficulty. So I know I'm coming to you virtually, and the only thing you saw was a picture of me. But I always like to use this scenario that if I stood in front of you, facial hair and everything, and I stood there with a dress and heels, I could still say that my gender identity is a man, though my gender expression might not meet that. And that's where I think certain beliefs start to shift when gender expression and gender identity does not match up. But what we need to, I think, welcome is that those two things could be very different, and oftentimes are, and that the only person that is able to identify their gender is the person themselves. So it is time to just kind of give a general understanding of some of these terms. So there's 5 different polls, and I'm going to ask Dr. Murphy to post the first poll right now. So on your screen, you have a definition that says a person who does not identify with the normative gender identities of male or female, similar to gender non-binary. So just very easily, all you're going to do is click the answer that you think is correct, and we'll see how people are doing. So we'll give you about 15 more seconds. So you can see on the screen, there's the options of agender, cisgender, genderqueer, or gender nonconforming. And again, it's a person who does not identify with the normative gender identities of male or female, similar to gender non-binary. All right, let's see where the results are. Okay, So we have 19% of you saying agender, 9% of you cisgender, 5% is genderqueer, and 66% is gender nonconforming. So the correct answer would be C, genderqueer. So 5% of you, congratulations. All right, let's move to the second poll. And this is just a gauge to see where we're at, and I will, talk a little bit more about these in a second. Poll number 2. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Here it is. A person whose gender identity does not fit within the socially defined binary of male or woman. Man or woman. Is it transgender, gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, or pangender? So it's a person whose gender does not fit within the socially defined binary of man or woman. Five more seconds. Okay, let's see the answers. Okay, so 53% of you have got it correct. So thank you. And as we pull up the next poll, and there's just 3 more, just to kind of assess where people are at. I will say this, and I've touched on this, and I'm going to talk while you answer this next one. I touched on this in the first webinar that I did, that language is constantly evolving. So, what we might think one terminology might mean might not be the same to that person. And I encourage you to look at that, because it talks about how to really handle those situations. So here, I'll give you 5 more seconds to answer what describes a person whose gender identity is a combination of 2 genders. Okay, Dr. Murphy, let's see. Okay, gender fluid, okay. So since we're talking about gender identity, it is by gender. So if we were to say something like gender expression is a combination of 2 genders, then that might be gender fluid. All right, 2 more. Thank you all for responding, putting you all to work today. So someone whose gender identity aligns with their assigned gender at birth. Is it A, straight gender? I don't know why I'm giving you letters. There's no letters here. Is it straight gendered, agender, two-spirit, or cisgender? So 10 more seconds. Someone whose gender identity aligns with their assigned gender at birth. Okay, Dr. Murphy, let's see. Okay, 61% of you are correct. So it is cisgender. So I always like to say, my name's Anthony. I identify as a cisgender male and identify with the he, his, him pronouns. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And this last one, this is a test to see who's been paying attention so far. This refers to your internal individual sense of gender. Is it gender expression, gender, gender identity, or sex? 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see how people responded. All right. So thank you for listening, because 87% of you have responded correctly. So remember that individual internal sense of gender refers to gender identity. Okay, so let's keep going on. When you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to go through these terms in more detail. And like I said, there's also an hour-long webinar on terminology. So I'm not going to go through these all right now. I'm just clicking through so that you see that they are here for you. And that is, I think, something that is really important. And also to listen to that 1 hour-long webinar. I will say, I'll stop on this slide for a second. The idea of two-spirit, I know I've talked about this previously as well, but there are many cultures in which there are multiple genders, right? We are one of few cultures that really just identify gender in two different constructs. Gender pronouns, also really important. Also a big thing of what I talked about on the webinar from 2 months ago, but it is important to recognize and to identify pronouns specifically to that person. Something that I will say when working with gender diverse individuals is I try to come from a more individualized sense of just using a gender neutral with everybody, such as they, them, theirs. This way, I don't have to worry about offending somebody or misgendering somebody by coming from a gender neutral pronoun. I always say when I'm giving a lecture or a talk or talking with students or anything, I identify my pronouns so that other people know which pronouns that I go by. I also make sure that I don't request other people to do this because I don't want people to out themselves if they're not comfortable with it. And that whole coming out process is a whole different topic, both for gender identity and for affectional identity, which we will cover on May 26th. But just, you know, take a look at this and also take a look at that first webinar. And there's also a really good 5-minute video about the importance of gender pronouns. So that really is just some quick foundation to get us to where, how do we work with gender diverse people a little bit more effectively. So it's important to recognize maybe where do some of the challenges arise from at the beginning. So unfortunately, this goes back to the 1970s where there was a lot of time where counselors themselves and people in the helping professions began to question the challenges that minorities experienced in counseling overall. And specifically in the mid-1970s, there was a lot of, and this is a very outdated term, but transsexual group therapy, where it was specifically targeting the idea that we need to, we don't support people's gender diversity, but we need to work on that gender transition of keeping them, and these are the language that was used in the mid-1970s, keeping people the gender that they were born at. So it was a lot more about battling with individuals that were coming for group therapy at that time. And not shocking, but then in the 1980s, we started to recognize that that just wasn't okay, right? That we have to celebrate people for their individuality. And we saw a rise in the peer-led support groups that really came from a more strength-based approach and try to target working with gender diverse people from a sense of celebration. So if we have that understanding about the behavioral health timeline, coupled with the current Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, we have to recognize that already we are coming from a deficit, that behavioral health care workers are trying to work with people that have a negative history of the mental health field, and we need to recognize the stigma that's associated with a mental health diagnosis. So just getting somebody to come into the door to seek mental health support or behavioral health treatment is already difficult. Once we get them in, then it's our job to make sure we're coming from a more strengths-based approach and a more celebratory manner. And we'll go through some different ways to do that. So we know that when gender diverse individuals seek any kind of support, right, they are being seen with greater rates of stigma. They face a lot of social intimidation, ridicule, and threats on a regular basis. We also know that there's higher rates of prejudice, discrimination, and marginalization, and all of that really negatively impacts their ability to access education, employment, and housing. And because of these instances, we face, gender diverse individuals do face more significant health disparities. And all of this can be seen within this framework, right? So we know that individuals that identify as a gender minority or gender diverse experience higher rates of external stigma. If we couple that with the internal stigma that people experience and just the general mental health processes, we see greater rates of mental health problems and greater rates of physical health problems. So there'll be a video probably towards the end. It's only about 4 minutes I'm going to show you. But it really speaks to the point of the internal stigma that many people within the gender diverse community face, right? The feeling of, I don't want to be outed, or I don't want people to know who I really am. That internal stigma can really build up, and it's what people do experience on the day-to-day basis. And I'm going to give you a quick story that I think every time I tell this, do this presentation, I always talk about this, because I have a really close friend of mine who is a trans man, and he works for a company that he's out in the field doing some traditional male work, jackhammering in the streets, construction. And we were talking about, I guess now maybe about 2 months ago, and we were just talking about the stress and the stress of everything. And specifically, it was right around the beginning of the coronavirus. And we were just talking about work, and I was like, you know, trying to validate and say, well, you know, at least you get to go to work. You still get to go out there and, you know, feel that sense of structure. And he turned to me and he said, yeah, but Anthony, every day I go to work, I'm dealt with additional stressors. And I sat back and I asked him, you know, can you tell me more about that? And something as simple, and this is what I talk about when we're in the behavioral healthcare field, I think sometimes we take for granted certain things that individuals within this gender diverse population have to experience on a day-to-day, this internal or external stigma that they deal with. And he was assigned female at birth and had gender affirmation surgery, gosh, now probably about 10 years ago. And, you know, all the men that are out in the field, you know, when you're out and doing work, they just go to the bathroom and in the woods or, you know, by the side of the truck. And he was telling me how every day he has to plan out when he can use the bathroom, how much fluid he can drink, you know, the route in which he's going to do the work, just to make sure that the people around him don't know that he's a trans man, even though there are, you know, some rumors out there, and he's heard some people, you know, mocking of that. And when I hear that, it makes me as a counselor, as a licensed professional counselor, take a step back and think, all right, let me try to understand a little bit more what people within this population, what they're going through on a daily basis that might be equated to this external stigma or that internal stigma that I don't have to think about and that I don't have to work through. And then it helps me try to at least gain a greater sense of empathy. When I share that story, and in this video towards the end, this person by the name of Jack, he'll talk about too the daily stressors that come along with it. So we know that physical violence and sexual violence is the most highly documented within the gender diverse population. You can see the statistics here in terms of 43 to 60% have experienced some sort of physical violence, 43 to 46% have experienced some sort of sexual violence. And unfortunately, within any kind of research, these numbers are an extremely low estimate because of reporting issues, because people don't want to report. So yes, these are the numbers that we have. I implore you to really look at this and think that these numbers are actually much higher. The other piece of the puzzle is that proximal minority stress that gender diverse individuals can feel and can experience. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of research that exists on the impact of the expectations of violence or the expectations of discrimination. and how that really then transcends itself to internalized transphobia. So that every day, like just kind of being on your guard to think, okay, what's going to happen? What do I need to look out for? What could I come up to today? Like my friend's story, that every day of what can I do to make sure that I'm not discriminated, that there is no violence against me. History of concealment of gender identity to avoid intimidation, exactly what I just talked about. And I'm not going to show you the whole video, but you'll be able to watch it on your own. What I will say is that we also need to look at the various intersections when we're talking about individuals within the gender diverse community, right? So we look at race and gender, right, in the intersections between race, gender, and gender identity. So maybe somebody who is a trans man, who is Caucasian, they might experience a little bit more privilege than somebody who is an African-American trans man, or even worse, an African-American trans female. So still exploring all of the intersections that we do on the everyday basis when we're talking about culture, and looking at it from the lens of gender and gender identity as well. Okay, so how do we as a behavioral health care workforce begin to support gender diverse people? Even after everything I've said, we still bring a lot of resources and a lot of skills. One of the first things we need to do is affirm people for who they are. And I use that term in a broad context because we should be doing that of every person who walks through our door, regardless of gender, regardless of affectional identity, regardless of race, culture, age, socioeconomic status, making sure that we are affirming people for who they are. Specifically within this population, we're talking about affirming gender identity, expression, and presentation beyond that male-female binary. So how do we really do that? One of the things is making sure that we acknowledge our own biases, right? So what's the first thing that comes to your mind if I were to say, or if I were to stand in front of you in a dress and heels? What would be some of those initial thoughts? What would be the look on your face, right? Because those things are signs of that we're not affirming. So making sure we understand our own biases. So if somebody comes in and maybe their gender expression does not match our assumption of their gender identity, because remember, it would only be our assumption, that our face and our actions do not reflect that. I talked about this a little bit already, but recognizing the intersections of identities. And then also understand that we may misstep and mess up because we're human beings, right? We are going to misstep or mess up. And in the first webinar that I did that's online, you can hear how to really correct yourself and give yourself grace in knowing that, you know, we're trying our best, and if I mess up, it's not intentional, and how to correct ourselves. So I wanted to take a couple seconds. If you've been walking around your office, your room, your house, try to come back to the screen really quick, because I'm going to ask in the chat box. One of the things I talked about is understanding our own biases, right? And I'm going to ask for a really honest moment. I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, what do you understand about gender diversity? What makes sense to you? And I would love to just see a couple people just just respond in the chat box. So what do you understand about gender diversity? Reflect for a moment and think about, the little bit that we just talked about already, and understanding that non-binary aspect of gender. What makes sense to you? Let's see here. There's 140 people here. Okay, thank you. I see some responses. And I'll call a couple of them out too, not by name. I understand that the most important thing is to keep an open mind and to not make assumptions, okay? But there's a lot that I don't understand, and I do have biases. I do feel that as the gender diverse culture expands, there's more to learn and the information terms keep changing. Absolutely. And I will say that it's also changing for me, right? Every time I do a presentation, I have to really look at my slides again to make sure I'm using the correct terminology, because even after, and if you were on the webinar last month, 2 years of research, I use a whole different language when it comes down to affectional identity. Gender identity is along a continuum. Okay. So thank you. Some really good responses there. I understand that everyone is different. We have to respect their choice. I'll come back to that one in a second, because one of the things, and I think this is where the language with trans man and trans woman and affirmation, gender affirmation has come in, is recognizing that for that person, not a choice, it's affirming who they've always been, right? Okay, so my second question to reflect on for a moment is, what do you have difficulty understanding about gender or gender diversity? And I think I saw some of that in here already. It's hard to understand the individual's experience when outward and inward experiences, identity is different, yeah. And if you think about that, why is it hard to understand? And that's where I go back to that initial conversation. It's hard to understand because from the time that we're born, gender is ingrained in who we are, right? When I do this presentation, we have a longer time, I pulled up the most popular male and most popular female toys in 2018. And even in 2018, we see a very young age, gender is ascribed to people in the way that they play, the way that the clothes that they wear. So that's where it gets really difficult. I have difficulty with pronouns to use. So do I still do. Even when I run groups, I've just come to the idea of using more gender neutral pronouns to just make it less of a problem, or just using names. Okay, language and how it changes. I really encourage you. I feel like I'm selling like an infomercial or something here, but for 2 easy payments of $0, you can watch the hour-long webinar on language, because I think that would be helpful. I have a hard time teaching others about gender diversity. I think it's really simple. The person is who they say they are. You affirm them, you use their pronouns if it's just like they use yours. Yes, I agree. I think part of this is when we say we have difficulties understanding that everybody's on a different timeline in their gender revolution, right? And part of helping other people join that is to educate people in a more considerate way. And I think part of that makes us try to reflect on our own journey as well. Oh, thank you, Dr. Murphy. She just posted the link about the language for all of you to have. So I take this moment, and if we were in real life, I would break you up into small groups, because it's important to have this reflective moment about gender and an honest moment, right? Because the only way we can move forward is by recognizing what we know and what we don't know. What are our biases? What aren't? So how do we understand and support our awareness? And we're doing that just today, right? And part of that is recognizing that today's hour-long presentation is not the end-all be-all, right? That this is a topic that we have to continue to educate ourselves on. But the awareness piece, right? Bringing our own awareness to what's going on. The range of gender identities, we are doing that already today. The complexities and the ongoing nature of the coming out process please come to our webinar May 26th. But we'll talk a little bit about that. And in the video, in the 4-minute video that I'll show, he talks about it as well. The impact of transphobia, heterosexism, and cisgenderism. Also becoming more aware of that. We talked about the difference between gender identity and gender expression. Having resources. At the end of this, I'll give you a list of resources. And I've seen at the beginning, some of you are coming from all over the country, so welcome. What I will say is that when you give a resource or a referral, please check that first. Keep in mind, anybody coming for support, right? It makes you feel vulnerable already. And the fact that they've come to you for some support needs to be celebrated. Now, if we give them a referral for some resource or some other kind of support, and it's not one that's actually gender affirming or even still open, the likelihood that they're going to come back is low. So always check your resources and your referrals. Also seek collaboration and consultation. You know, we need to we have to work on this together, right? We need to understand that we can't do this with anybody alone, and we need to continue to seek support from others. The environment in which we have. I'm going to email Dr. Murphy or Kathy something. It's a pamphlet on how to talk about gender and affectional identity with your clients or with the people that you support. When I talk about the environment, it's not only just okay to have that non-discrimination policy visible, but to have different pamphlets and handouts that address gender identity, affectional identity, that really allow people who come in to see you or come into your offices or just interact with you to know that this environment is a safe, supportive, and affirming environment. Continuing to get training, and I say this in the unisex and individual bathrooms, I think is really important. We don't have the time to go into that debate or that conversation, but I think we are getting to a place in the world where treating everybody as an individual and making sure that everyone feels comfortable is the appropriate and the most important thing. And bathrooms, I think, is just one way to do that. Think about your forms, right? Do your forms have check boxes? Let's be honest. Can you fit every kind of gender identity and gender expression maybe on a checkbox? Also, my definition of gender identity might be very different from somebody else's. So why not just have write-in sections if possible? Allow the person to express who they are versus asking them to fit themselves in a box. Gender affirming practices, we talked about using the pronoun that the person requests and the preferred language. And if you mess up, you correct yourself, you apologize, and you continue to practice that. Don't out anybody. I said this earlier, but even when I teach class, I don't ever ask my students in class to give me their gender identity or their gender pronouns, right? I always start off with mine in class, and if students feel comfortable, I've had some students, they'll share theirs, but if I said, listen, I want everybody to tell me what your gender pronouns are, I might be setting up an environment where I am outing somebody. So either A, I have a student that then has to tell me their pronoun, and it might be a different pronoun than maybe what they are expressing themselves as. And then maybe they weren't ready to do that, or they didn't feel like that environment was that safe, and now I'm outing them in the classroom. Or they have to then, because they don't feel comfortable, provide a different pronoun just to feel like they don't want any additional stigma, and then I'm increasing that internal stigma for themselves. So it's a really tricky balance. I always say I lead off with it. Even on an individual basis, when I meet with people, I lead off with it. Sometimes you can see on their faces, they're like, what the heck is this guy even telling me this for? And I can, use that as a teaching moment, or at least allow that space to have that conversation. Other gender affirming practices: be empathic, have compassion, care. I always chuckle inside when I have this slide because I think for behavioral health care workers, we get it. Unfortunately, I think when we look at gender identity and gender expression, we still can have some of these biases, and maybe that empathy isn't there 100%. And then the other thing is just working through those minority stressors. And you'll have this slide, but it really is, how do you help somebody battle through all of that internal and external stigma? So facilitating emotional awareness, empower assertive communication. Really, you're helping somebody become a more empowered individual. There's a culture that's out there. I believe in the traditional Native American culture, and they're the culture that has the gender identity of two-spirit. They actually, within their culture, have identified that individuals that are transgender are actually provided to families who need the support and the strength to overcome difficult times. So in the Native American culture, the transgender individuals are actually viewed as more, as higher than other individuals. So really it's that validating strength and affirming the healing power of all individuals. Another way, I think, is just recognizing and coming from a wellness model. There's many wellness models out there. I will also send over, it's the Aztecs. Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. The wellness model, I think there's also, I'll send a really good article that gives you a specific case study and navigates you through how to use the individual self-wellness model. Which looks at how do you explore someone's creative self, their coping self, their social self, physical self, and essential self. It's coming from that strengths-based approach of celebration and empowerment. So I know I'm going very quickly. I just stopped the share for a second so I can make sure that the volume is up. I am going to show you this quick, you'll see it says a little bit more than 4 minutes, but I'm only going to show the first 4 minutes and 17 seconds of this video. And then we will have time to open it up for questions. So you could watch the rest, but we are going to start it now.
Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm transgender. Let me take a guess at some of the thoughts that might be running through your head right now. Transgender, wait, does that mean that they're actually a man or actually a woman? Wonder if he's had the surgery yet. Oh, now I'm looking at his crotch. Look to the right, that's a safe place to look. Yes, I knew it. No real man has hips like those. My friend's daughter is transgender. I wonder if they know each other. Oh my gosh, he is so brave. I would totally support his right to use the men's bathroom. Wait, but how does he use the bathroom? How does he have sex? Okay, let's stop those hypothetical questions before we get too close for my comfort. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did come here today to share my personal experiences being transgender, but I did not wake up this morning wanting to tell an entire audience about my sex life. I mean, of course, that's the problem with being trans, right? People are pretty much always wondering how we have sex and what kind of equipment we're working with below the belt. Being trans is awkward. And not just because the gender I was assigned at birth mismatches the one I really am. Being trans is awkward because everyone else gets awkward when they're around me. You know, people who support me and all other trans people wholeheartedly are often so scared to say the wrong thing, so embarrassed to not know what they think they should, that they never ask. And part of what was so nerve-wracking about coming out as transgender was knowing that people wouldn't know what I meant. And when someone comes out as gay, people know what that means. But when you come out as trans, you have to face the misconceptions that will color other people's impressions of you even after you've educated them. And you will have to educate them. When I came out, I wrote a 10-page encyclopedic document with a zip file attachment of music and videos that I sent to every single person I came out to. And I kept in my email signature for months afterwards, because you also don't ever stop coming out. I came out to the accountant helping with my taxes and the TSA agents who didn't know which one of them should pat me down, the man or the woman. I mean, I just came out to everyone watching this. And when I came out to my dad, to my great relief, he was totally cool with me being trans. But as soon as I started talking about physically transitioning, he freaked. And I quickly realized it was because he, like so many other people, think that physical transition means just one thing: the surgery. Now listen, if there were one magical surgery that could turn me into a tall, muscular, societally perfect image of a man overnight, I'd sign up in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. There are dozens of different gender-affirming surgeries, from chest surgeries to bottom surgeries to facial feminization and man sculpting. Many trans people will only ever undergo one procedure in their lifetime, if that. Maybe because they don't personally feel the need, but also because they're expensive, and health insurance is only beginning to cover them. Instead, the first step for a trans person seeking physical transition is usually hormone replacement therapy. Hormones are why I have a deeper voice and some sparse whiskers on my neck and a giant pimple on my chin. Basically, they put you through a second puberty. It's a blast. Now, because our transitions are slower and steadier than historic misconceptions can lead people to believe, there can be some confusion about when to call someone by their new name and pronouns. There's no distinct point in physical transition at which a trans person becomes their true gender. As soon as they tell you their new name and pronouns, that's when you start using that name and pronouns. And I know it can be difficult to make the change. You might slip up here and there. I've slipped up myself with other trans people. But you know, I always think to myself, if we can change from calling Puff Daddy to P. Diddy, and if we apologize profusely when we use the wrong gender pronoun for someone's pet cat, I mean, I think we can make the same effort for the real humans in our lives. Now.
All right. That is where I'm stopping this, but you will have it in your slide, and you can finish watching it. I just like to show that video because I think Jack really gets to, in that quick 4 minutes, touch on some really important things that really summarize what we've been talking about. The idea of all those internal thoughts that go on in a person's life from day to day. The pronoun topic, the idea of how and when do we refer or call people by the names that they would like to be called by. What I will say, just to wrap this up, because we'll have a couple minutes for questions. I will also say this: if we don't have time for me to answer these questions, I will make sure that Dr. Murphy sends me the questions, and I will type up answers and send them back to send to all of you. I don't want to leave with these questions not answered, but the World Professional Association for Transgender Health really does provide a ton of information regarding education, research, public policy. They have specific standards of care, which you can find at this website. It's in 18 different languages. It's free. If you're looking for a really good resource, I think this is one of the greatest places to start with. So just to end, I like to end with these two quotes. So the first one is, "My body does not define who I am. I am a boy, but my body may show different. I know who I am. I don't need anyone to tell me and call me what I'm not." And the second one is, "Be who you are, not who the world wants you to be." So with that, you will have some resources as well. But I will allow, I guess we have 5 minutes for questions. I do apologize, but thank you all for joining.
Okay, so we've had quite a few questions come in over the over the time of the webinar, and we will include maybe a little Q&A document that if for any questions we aren't able to get to. And so if folks have additional questions, if you want to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A, we'll collect all of your questions, and Dr. Zazzarino can address them, and we'll send that out as a resource document. There is a request,
Yeah,
Anthony.
I saw that, Dr.
Okay.
Murphy. I saw a ton of questions. I was like, ooh, that's why I said that I'll type something up as well.
Somebody's also asking if you can go back to the resource page while we're talking, just so they can see that. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to go in order of how they came in here. So you mentioned this briefly, but what kind of demographic information should be collected in an electronic medical record?
So this is a really interesting question, and I'm going to tell you I don't have a simple answer, and I'll explain why. There's a lot of different answers that are out there. I'm going to give you mine. It is not the end-all be-all. I think having open-ended questions about affectional identity and gender identity are really helpful, just to demonstrate to that person that you're aware and that you're open to differences and different people. One of my friends actually texted me about 2 weeks ago. That's a lie. I guess it was about 2 months ago. I don't know. Time is a blur right now. But she had gone to her dentist, and the dentist on the form said something about gender identity. And she was like, I can't believe my dentist is asking me this. And I said, well, I think it's good that your dentist is asking, because what about people who might not feel comfortable? Now they can go to this dentist, and they know that this dentist is at least aware and open to having maybe an understanding of working with different people. I think having those questions demonstrates awareness and acceptance. What I will say about medical records, though, and I'm not a lawyer, is that unfortunately, if individuals that are transgender are not legally gone through the process of gender affirmation or with their legal documents, you do have to go by individual's legal name and legal gender in medical records. The way I always talk about this with my clients is it's just for paper. I recognize you for you, but unfortunately, legally, we have to go through that.
Thank you. Okay, let's see here. There's so many. I'm trying to see if any of them go together. Okay, so there's a question about special considerations when working with young adults, maybe 12 to 14, who are struggling with gender identity, and people dismissing their needs because of age.
Yes, and I hear this all the time when I run groups that, and you know, people, teens might come in and express themselves as one gender this week, and then next month as a different gender. And I hear from parents all the time, oh, this is just a fad. And, you know, part of it is, I think we need to allow our teens to try on different genders until one just feels right. There is, let me see, I think it should be in the resources. Yes, if you look on the National, two of them, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Institute Center on Halstead, that resource, and the second one, the National Center for Transgender Equality, there's some really good specific pamphlets and information to provide to family members, teens, and there's also like cute little books to read to even younger kids about gender. One of the biggest statistics that I have learned throughout all of this is that a lot of research is demonstrating the fact that gender identity is formed as early as 3. So we need to be speaking about gender. And I think what we're doing here is continuing to engage in this conversation. And I'm seeing in the chat, and I do apologize, and I know Dr. Murphy did comment on this, but unfortunately, even though we might be moving forward universally, things are a little bit slower to catch up. But I do thank you all for your engagement. I thank you all for completing these surveys and just being here. Yes, the government. You know, we do our best, and you know, we'll get back to everyone on these questions. So thank you again, and I want to honor your time and respect your time. So have a great rest of your week.
So thank you so much to all the participants on the call. And thank you to all of the questions as Dr. Zazarino offered. We will collect all of these questions. I'll go back through the chat and find them all, and we'll put them together in a separate document. We'll also include the links to the earlier webinars that were recorded in this series, and also give you a heads up about the upcoming seminars. So thank you again so much for your time, and thank you so much to Dr. Zazarino.